Thank you so much, everybody, for coming along this evening. It's very much appreciated. And James and I are really looking forward to being able to share a very short presentation, we hope, and also to answer any questions, have any conversations with you afterwards. But I'm going to let James begin and introduce and step through some slides that we've got for you.
Yeah.
So off we go.
Thanks so much, Ro. I mean, I'm just checking I'm audible at the back. Thank you very much. Did a quick mic check. Ro said, yeah, I'm James. We're from Path Financial, which is essentially a financial advice firm which has been set up to help tackle things like the climate crisis and environmental problems. Basically, we want to save the planet, and part of that is, awareness raising, and then beyond that, helping people with whatever they need. So the title of the presentation, How Green is Your Money? Well, we're going to go through sort of several things. We may as well dive into our favourite chap, which is coming after the, the intro slides. And that's Mr. Attenborough. So I know it's up there on the screen, but we've got, the quote is, it's crazy. Banks, pension funds investing in fossil fuels, which jeopardise the very future people are saving for. And it's true. This is enough of a problem in and of itself. People kind of underestimate the impact that where their money goes can have on the planet. But since 2012, the amount of money that's gone into sort of pension funds and that sort of thing has skyrocketed, really, just because of legislation and people being auto-enrolled into pensions, okay? So the amount of money that's in pensions, and it's not just pensions, but certainly in pensions, has skyrocketed. And what we see in the UK is that traditionally they are invested in FTSE companies. And the sorts of FTSE companies you might expect to see are these people. Now, I don't need to tell you necessarily who all these individuals are, and I'm sure you've seen the headlines recently around the profits of companies like BP and Shell. So pension benefits go up, people put more money into their pensions, that's excellent, it's a big tick, people are saving for their future, and that's commendable and it's brilliant. What is not so brilliant is if we just leave it there, the reality is that the money goes to, say, a default type investment. It will go to generally the largest companies in the UK, and generally those are the sorts of companies that are in front of us. And again, going back to the headlines this week, we know what damage, especially things like fossil fuels, are doing, and they're recording record profits. So what we're trying to do is raise awareness around that and then potentially change that, because it's not the only option available to you, and there's more that can be done in that manner. So this highlights it quite nicely. I mean, in total, there's something like £3 trillion in invested pension assets in the UK. There's a short video coming up, actually, which talks a bit about sort of deforestation, but the items on the right kind of sort of nicely list all the nefarious activities that are really harming the planet. So we've got things like air freight, coal, it doesn't just have to be environmental related. We might look at things like gambling or labour standards. All of these sort of headlines can be massively improved with where you put your money. And there's some, I guess, ironies in that where people's savings are. So the examples we've got here, medics are investing in tobacco, climate activists, without knowing it at all, they're putting all this hard work in their private life, but they might be investing in very, very companies that are undoing all that work through no fault of their own, they just don't know it. And I'll touch on a minute another example, but basically all these amazing things that you can do in your private life to have, let's say, a small footprint or a meaningful impact on the world, and all the hard work, Jean, that you're doing with Green at Basingstoke, can be undone without really knowing it, just because of sort of things in the background, like your banking, like your investments, like your pensions. I think we're moving on to a video now.
Babes?
Yeah?
There's a delivery for you.
Okay. Hiya.
Are you Amber Khan?
Yeah.
I've got this delivery here for you.
Sorry.
What the heck?
What's that?
It's a Deforester 5000.
And
Yeah, no, I
What?
haven't ordered that.
What is this
Yeah,
for?
yeah.
Why are you lowering it?
Yeah.
Can
Why,
you just
why
stop?
is that going down?
Do you want to check the address? It says Amber Khan.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that
I'm Amber
that's
Khan,
like
but
a misprint or
there's-
something.
I
That's
don't
not
even
us.
know what that is.
I'm not really sure. All I know is from pension funds.
What are
Pension
these?
fund.
What are these?
This is also part of your order.
Chainsaws? For what?
So there should be 12 chainsaws that you ordered as well.
Yeah, my pension's not bringing me
I
chainsaws.
completely
take those back.
understand, but I haven't got the time. I have got other deliveries, okay? Thank you very much.
This is ridiculous.
I
And
don't
he's still bringing over stuff. Like, look. Why? What are we going to do? What did you order?
I didn't order this. I don't know. Why have we got chainsaws?
Why is it from your pension? Like, what the? Why?
Yes, did anyone recognise either the advert or the logo, by the way, in the bottom right? It was sort of like 3 M's tied together. It's the Make My Money Matter campaign, so I don't know if anyone's heard of that. Film director Richard Curtis has basically been for a long time campaigning on this sort of issue, and part of his campaigning has involved setting up the Make My Money Matter campaign. A lot of research has gone into the background to try and ascertain what the difference is that your pension funds could have in terms of your impact on the world. And the headline figure, based on the methodology used, is essentially that, as you can see here, it's about 21 times more powerful than essentially other actions you might be taking in your private life. So it's obviously it's great if we're sort of eating our own food or growing our own vegetables, or perhaps we're eating a certain way and reducing meat intake, a lot of the usual stuff that you'd expect to do in your private life. But actually, going back to the point I was making earlier, the impact really is where you put your money. And then what the underlying companies, for example, that you're investing in, their activities is what makes the real difference. Not that the other things should be sidelined, and why would you want to do that? But again, it's just about reiterating the point of 21 times. It's a pretty meaningful figure. I mean, you could halve that and it'd still be pretty comprehensive. I think at this stage, Ro, I might hand over to you. Is that all right?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, James. So, although it's a sort of light-hearted video, I would just say it's hopefully been very powerful. It is light-hearted. That's what it's meant to be. But Richard Curtis is extremely good at trying to get that point across, and a lot of his campaigns are like that. So I'm just going to jump onto this. Everyone's probably wondering, okay, well, that's great. We know what the problem is, and we know that there is an issue. You know, money needs to be flowing into the right places so that we can help tackle this massive emergency that we have, you know, the biggest thing that humankind has faced. But what a lot of people are doing is exactly what is up on the screen at this point in time. So sticking their heads in the sand. So inertia is a massive problem. And, you know, one thing that I'd love everyone to take away from today, from just watching me and James, is to take some action, however small it is. Really, how do you do that, though? So practical steps, and this is what hopefully I can help with here. So, starting off with cash and banking. Quite a useful load of tools out there, often online, which, you know, hopefully everyone can access now. So we've got a couple of screenshots here. Ethical Consumer is the one over on the left-hand side. Now, you do have to pay for a subscription for it, but it is really, really helpful. They do a lot of research. It's very thorough, and they will give you sort of best buy tables, in a sense, in terms of which are the most ethical banking providers out there for savings, current accounts, for example. The other website, which is actually very useful, that we've put a little snapshot on here on the other side of the screen, is bank.green. Now, they give you an indication. It's more focused on the carbon side of things rather than looking at social and environmental impact. So the research that Ethical Consumer go into is very much about looking at all sorts of different aspects, not just the carbon footprint. But it's also very useful to get an understanding, you know, have you got a fossil-free banking provider? So using those tools, it's definitely worth seeing if you can find, you know, where your current banking provider is at in terms of how sustainable, ethical, what their green credentials are. And if you don't necessarily agree with that, perhaps they do finance the fossil fuel industry, can you swap? Is there an alternative out there that provides you with what you need? So definitely worth looking at. And the one thing I would say is, that is a nice small bit of action that perhaps people don't realise the impact of, because people will often think they have their cash, they put it into a bank account and it's just sat there waiting for them for when they need to access it. I'm afraid banks don't work like that. So the cash goes into the banks and then they loan it out. And those loans that they make out could quite likely be a part of something which you don't agree with, whether it's the fossil fuel industry, weapons for war, it could be environmentally damaging mining, all sorts of negative impact industries. So I'm going to jump on here to another aspect of money. So we touched on this already, and James has very kindly shown us a little bit about where the default pensions go into, and the fact that over these past few years, since 2012, when we had some auto-enrolment legislation around pensions, actually a lot more money has gone into pension pots. But sadly, the default pots are investing in some of the really negative practices out there. So definitely speak to your employer. That's really key. Find out what type of pension you have, find out where your own pension is invested, and demand some transparency as well. Quite often you'll find that they won't necessarily give you all of the information that you want to know. So I guess, as it says on here, do they offer you the option potentially of moving to a different investment choice if you've got that option? How easy is it to go about that? Making sure that you do go and do that research and gather that information if you feel comfortable doing so. For individuals who perhaps are at the point where they haven't got pension pots, or they're not saving into pension pots, well, then they might have investments. So I will come on to that on this next slide here. So you might have ISAs, and they don't necessarily have to be cash ISAs. So it could be a stocks and shares ISA, which does have investments in it. It could be an investment account. So all sorts of different investments could be held within an investment account. They could be investment bonds, for example, and all of those different types of products that are available within the UK, within the financial market, will all have some sort of association somewhere with an investment piece. And that's where it's really very useful to look at each different aspect and each element of where your money might be held. So not just looking at cash and banking, but looking at all sorts of different places. Now, if you do have a pension and you have got the option to change it, or you do have an ISA or any sort of general investments, have a look at whether or not you've got the option to change it. So, how do you go about doing that? It is inherently complicated, I will not lie. It's very, very complex. Trying to fathom out what might be ethical and what might meet your ethical standards is really difficult, and there's a lot of nuances to it. And as soon as you start delving, it just opens an enormous minefield. So one thing that it's worth looking at is, for the individual provider that you have, do they have the option of allowing you to change your underlying investments? If they do, and perhaps they are investment funds, and that might be a new word for some people, I don't know. If they are investment funds, and that's something that you are familiar with, you can usually change them, and you will have a choice. There will be maybe a choice of another 20 different options, sometimes even thousands of different options. And there are some tools which, some websites that we put on this slide here as to how you can go about doing that. So there's a little screenshot there of one particular provider. So there are lots of providers out there in the UK. This is Fidelity, which you might have come across before, or maybe not. And this shows on their particular investment selection how you can go about changing. So it's literally a case of clicking on a drop-down box and finding an investment fund that is going to suit you, researching it, making sure that it is ethical and meets your requirements. There are some website links on here. So you've got Fund Eco Market, Sustainalytics, Ethical Consumer, again, who I mentioned earlier. And they're all really useful tools for being able to look into this and do it yourself. The one thing I would say is, though, it can be very, very valuable to get financial advice on this if you feel it's appropriate for you, because it is complicated. So it's worth looking at this stuff and seeing if you can get to the bottom of it yourself. And if you feel not, then do seek advice and do go and get some help and support with it. So that's a little bit about the how on it. So we've talked about banking and cash and how you can take practical steps to move and change. It's very easy using things like USwitch to change bank accounts, and they move direct debits and things like that over for you very easily. In terms of pensions and investments, hopefully they will offer you alternative choices and you can choose the ethical options, and these are some of the tools that can help you with it. So I'm going to go on to this bit here, just as a reminder really, that pensions, if your provider doesn't offer an alternative investment choice with that same provider that is ethical and meets your requirements, then you do have the choice with a pension to actually pick the whole thing up, move it to another provider that gives you better investment choices so that you can then be ethical or as much as you possibly can to be able to meet your needs. So that is an option. And perhaps some people don't realise that they have that choice. Even employers' workplace pension schemes can be moved. So that's one thing to say. It's not something which is necessarily needing to stay in a, let's say, traditional investment. It can be something which can be put into something far more ethical, but definitely worth always getting advice on that, and something to work with an employer on, because obviously it's a pension for all employees. So just as it says on here as well, do take care, do seek professional advice when it's appropriate, because it is a complex area. It's very interesting. Vanguard have put a suggestion out there that actually with professional advice you can get better returns. So we will come on to that later about, do you have to compromise with pensions, with any investments on how well your money does for you? And I think that's a really important point to come on to. So I'm going to pass back to James to explain what this means, because this is something you may not have seen before.
Thanks very much, Ro. This is probably my favourite visual, I suppose. It's fairly simple. I'll explain what it's kind of showing. Every incremental step, I guess, you make from the left to the right here is having a materially better impact on the world around you with regards to the investments you can make. I quite like the phrase 50 shades of green because, frankly, it's not binary, right? Rose just mentioned how there could be thousands of fund options. Some are better than others. Some are really dark green. Some are a bit green. Some are terrible. And so, it's a bit of a minefield, but we can make the nudge along that spectrum, if you like. So on the left here, we're kind of going back to the point I made earlier about all the traditional investments, the traditionally harmful or more incumbent industries, which, when you're looking at, say, an underlying fund in a pension, hasn't had any what is called screening applied to it. As we move across, you can start to screen out some of those options. So believe me when I say there are a lot of funds out there that will say, actually, we don't invest in mining and tobacco. And that's kind of as we're nudging ourselves along the green scale here, with kind of striking out some of these industries that we might not want to be invested in. And that in and of itself is a good first step for many people, because everyone's ethics differ, right? And everyone's personal preferences differ. At the far end of the spectrum, by comparison, and this is that sort of, I don't know, it kind of looks blue there, but I'd call it dark green on the screen on the right-hand side. We've got all the nice visuals of the bear and the recycled economy and the justice symbol and all that. is what we would call the positive impact end of the spectrum. So I don't know if you've seen earlier this sort of wheel logo in the bottom. They are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and that is what is used as a framework for our positive impact portfolios. And essentially, it's a call to action about how organisations, economies, individuals can better the world around them, people and planet, again. We are talking about the investment kind of world here. There's a little reference at the bottom, the global goals. I mean, you can go further, obviously, and then you start delving into more philanthropic activities. But in terms of investment and ensuring that there's a net benefit to you at the end as well, if we stick within the investment environment, then positive impact is about as powerful as you can get before you start delving into things like philanthropy, which people can do as well, obviously. This kind of proves the same thing. I mean, this shows the UN SDGs for short in the top left. There's 17 of them. So you can still get a really nice sort of diverse spread of investments, right? We've talked a lot about fossil fuels and that sort of thing, but really it goes far beyond that. That's just a very obvious sort of comparison point to make. And if I'm talking about the 50 sort of shades of green moving along the spectrum there, well, again, bottom left shows sort of incrementally better steps, really. So the FTSE example, which you might sort of think of as the default fund, seemingly has the most harmful activities in it because the FTSE invariably is made up of things like Rio Tinto and Glencore and mining and oil and gas and tobacco firms and that sort of thing. You can take a bit of a step further, you go further along that spectrum, suddenly you've managed to screen out all the red. You brought in a bit more green and there's a bit of neutral in there, but really your investments are starting to have a more powerful impact. At the bottom, we've obviously included an example of our portfolio. As I mentioned, we're at the positive impact end of the spectrum, so the very minimum threshold is obviously getting rid of nefarious industries, but actually we want to screen in using the Sustainable Development Goals that I mentioned earlier, those essentially companies that are going to have the most future-proof success, really, and positive impact on the world around them.
I'm just going to jump in very quickly, just because, so the UN SDGs, as we call them, and acronyms are a nightmare, but the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, if you've got existing investments, then do hold those providers to account, and referring to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals can be a very useful way to do that. Find out if they can give you information telling you what that alignment is, and if there is any alignment to it. Because often what we're finding is that they're not transparent about these things, whether it's trustees of pension schemes, or it's providers that are running funds, or it's banks and what their activities are involved in. Just seeing if you can hold them to account. It's quite a useful framework to use. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it's a useful framework to use. Yeah, and becoming much more common. You know, we like to think that it won't be very long before every provider just has this on their radar. Unfortunately, we're not there yet, but I think the pressure is really mounting on this sort of stuff. And again, that chart on the right-hand side shows that entire investment universe, thousands of funds, all very confusing. How on earth are you going to do the research? And actually shrinking down your focus over time, putting more impactful layers on the research into what the most impactful fund options might be out there for you, which is still pretty considerable. It's just, you really got to hone in, which is why, again, as Ro mentioned, sometimes it's better to have someone help you do it, but the option is generally there. Yeah, would you like to say a bit about measurement? Yeah, so, we talk about the sort of broader spectrum of, aligning with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and how you can help to alleviate poverty and making sure that we've got clean water and helping with climate change. That's really important, the social and environmental impact, but carbon footprint, given where we are today with the climate crisis, is also really important. So this slide is, I would say, a fun, or as fun as you can get with finances and this sort of thing, a fun indication for you. And it basically says, if you're looking at reducing, going from traditional investing to something which is positive impact, then actually you could make a carbon footprint saving that is equivalent to eating 1,900 cheeseburgers. Get that right? Which is a lot of cheeseburgers, and I wouldn't recommend anyone eat that many, certainly not in a year, or definitely not in a day. I personally don't even eat cheeseburgers, but there you go. Probably one which is maybe a little bit more interesting and might mean a bit more is, say, driving from London to Glasgow 84 times. So getting in your car, going backwards and forwards 84 times. It beggars belief, but actually that's really impactful when you're talking about carbon and the emissions that come from it. So we all like to have a cup of tea, I certainly do, or a cup of coffee, or a hot chocolate, boiling the kettle. 108,000 times, or just over, that's a lot of times. Probably, far more than any of us would need a cup of tea for. I don't know what that equates to in a day, but you'd probably be consistently boiling the kettle, I think. So yeah, I think it's quite a fun slide to look at, as I say, in the context of talking about finances. It's quite a useful way to have a pictorial representation of how that impacts with carbon footprint side of it.
I'd also just add on that point, and we haven't put it here, but this is a relatively modest, actually, sort of like average pension size in the UK. So this isn't like just the answer for everyone. The more money you have in a pension, the greater this impact is going to be. But using a sort of typical value size for an individual's private pension, you're essentially halving your footprint by moving it from again, we talk about this traditional area of investment to a more positive impact area of investment. It goes back to these are all things that we can kind of picture a bit easier in our private life. We can all imagine driving a car or boiling the kettle. So when you put it into that context, I think it's a bit more powerful. I just think it's a really useful illustration, frankly, because it's just all very tangible things.
Yep.
Yeah, go for it. Next one.
Next one.
This is the.
I spoke to this earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
Didn't I?
Rose already mentioned this, but basically, if you're going to invest your money in a certain way, and you're going to make more of an impact with it, and you want to be, say, cleaner and greener with it, ultimately, you still want to be providing for your own, needs and finances and expenditure and all that sort of thing. This is your money at the end of the day. And although I touched on philanthropy earlier, this isn't philanthropy. We're talking about investing your money in a positive impact way. And most people aren't willing to just give their money away in that regard, just to feel nice. It has to have a benefit to you financially as well. Essentially, what this chart is saying, it's 2 lines over a period of 5 years. The green one showing just the returns, essentially, of a positive impact portfolio, a typical one that we might look to manage, versus a sort of aggregated competitor, which is essentially in traditional investing. So it doesn't have any positive impact metrics. And essentially, I guess the point is twofold. One, that there's no tangible change in the way that the graphs move. In good markets give good returns. But in fact, post-COVID, there was quite a large outperformance by positive impact investments, which is shown where the green gets further away from the red, essentially, from 2020. And then if we look at it over the 5 years as a whole, have you had to trade off the return you get on your money with having a positive impact, and obviously go back to that feel-good feeling when you sleep at night as to where your money's invested? And the answer is no. And frankly, the differential is actually in favour of the positive impact sort of approach. So I don't know, I mean, obviously we can talk about that further, but essentially it's highlighting the point that you don't need to have a trade-off between doing good for yourself and your own pocket and doing good for the world. Our view, I mean, I think I can speak safely for Ro here as well, is that this is a very future-proof idea, conceptually, we think, as well, because if we're looking at the economy of tomorrow and the way that trends are going, we think that this sort of investing, well, it's certainly not going away, it's gaining traction and hopefully will continue to be very lucrative in that regard. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, or if I covered that well enough.
You've covered that brilliantly.
Great.
Yeah, excellent. So I think really then it's just a case of any questions at all. If anyone wants to ask us anything, they're welcome to now, or you can speak to us afterwards and have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. But yes, that was everything. I hope it was useful for everyone, and thank you so much for everybody at Green and Basingstoke for giving us the opportunity to speak about this and for sharing it with a wider audience as well. It is such an important message. Hopefully we've shown that and demonstrated that with the information that we've shared there. So really very much appreciated to Green and Basingstoke for hosting us, for having us here. Wonderful. Oh, thank you.
That's very kind. Thanks,
Yeah,
Rowan.
thank you.